Okay, we're right at 12:40, so we're going to get going with the second half of today's workshop. Once again, Texas RE's President and Chief Executive Officer, Jim Albright, to introduce our second keynote speaker.
Thank you, Matt. Welcome everybody back. Hopefully there's a higher percentage of people in the room that aren't online. Hopefully everybody will get back in here. I know we're coming back from lunch, but Matt runs a tight ship and wants to keep us on track. We're all in a real treat with the next keynote speaker. Dr. Michael Weber's work spans research and education on topics related to innovation, energy, and the environment. He is a Sid Richardson Chair in the LBJ School of Public Affairs and the John J. McKetta Centennial Energy Chair in the Department of Mechanical Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. Hook 'em. Dr. Weber has authored or co-authored more than 600 publications, including 5 full-length general interest books, and holds 6 patents. He's been published in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, and many other journals. I hear his book, Power Trip, The Story of Energy, is an excellent read and is a basis of award-winning 12-part television series that aired on PBS, Amazon Prime, and Apple TV. For those of y'all who haven't seen it, I would encourage you. Dr. Weber has previously been the Chief Technology Officer at Energy Impact Partners and the Chief Science and Technology Officer at ENGIE. He currently serves on the board of GTI Energy and the Scientific Advisory Council for ENGIE. On top of all that, he holds a BS and a BA from the University of Texas at Austin, and an MS and a doctorate in mechanical engineering from Stanford University. Now, I haven't known Michael for as long as I've known Jim Robb. I just met Michael today. But I do think we have a shared love for Texas Longhorn sports. And another interesting fact that Matt got out of him when he was talking to him before preparing for this keynote is that he's also a former drum major for the Longhorn Band. And he married the first female Longhorn Band drum major. And he actually competed with her and lost to her. But they've now been married for, I think, 30 years. So I think he won in the long run. So with that, Dr. Weber, thank you for being here. We look forward to hearing what you have to tell us.
Thanks, and appreciate it. So I don't have any slides. I thought I'd just make remarks and wander around a little bit like a Baptist preacher, then we'll have some Q&A. I appreciate the opening. Yeah, my wife and I competed head-to-head to be drum major of the Longhorn Band. I don't know if any of you are band families or are band kids or have band folks, and you know it. So I was a trumpet player, a self-absorbed, arrogant trumpet player, and she was a goofy trombone player. And I tried out to be drum major every year. Like, I sent a signal, like, I'm going to be drum major someday. We go to all the football games, all this stuff. And then I tried out as a freshman, which is ridiculous because no freshmen become drum major. I tried out as a sophomore, which is ridiculous because no sophomores get selected. But I was kind of sending the signal, I'm coming, right? And then my junior year, I'm going to try out again. You try out at the end of your junior year for senior year. And my then girlfriend says, hey, I might try out too. I'm like, you can't try out. You're my girlfriend. She's like, okay, well, now I'm definitely going to try out. And then we competed head-to-head, and she beat me, put me in my place, and that's been very good for our relationship, as you heard. So that's Julia. And when she was the first female drum major Longhorn Band, that was 100 years of Longhorn Band without a woman drum major. It was like a statewide news story. So the Houston Chronicle and Dallas Morning News, they all did articles on it. It was very interesting. And then she did it for a year, then stepped aside, so I got a turn. So it was very polite. So it was very kind of her. And as I was leaving the house this morning, I give a lot of speeches for student groups, different people, and I said, I'm going to go do a keynote today. And she said what she always says, just to be supportive. We should all have a supportive spouse. She likes to give encouraging words. And she says, give them hope, which is always what she tells me. And I'm like, honey, this is the Texas grid. I don't think hope's enough. I think we got to have like plans and operations and technology. Anyway, so she was very supportive on the way out. That was Julia's comments. So hope is a good place to start, but doesn't get us all the way there. Talk about grid reliability. And I thought maybe I'd just give some of my perspective, big picture on what's happening with the world of energy and some of the energy transitions and how the world's evolving, what that might mean with us if we care about the grid and grid reliability. First of all, there are a couple of technology trends that have been underway for a long time, I mean like 150 or 200 years, that are still relevant today. And I think those 3 technical trends are worth remembering. The first is that we're on a long-term trend towards greater efficiency. This is not new. It's been happening for a long time, but our light bulbs become more efficient, air conditioners, our devices, everything gets more efficient as time goes on. And this is a good news story because that means we use less energy and mass per good and service we provide. So the long-term efficiency trends have been in place and will remain in place, and this is good news, and that solves a lot of our problems, frankly. So one way this shows up at the macro level is in the United States, we consume the same energy today or even less today than in the year 2000, 25 years ago, despite the population having grown 20% and the economy having grown 270%. That is a remarkable thing, that our energy consumption is the same or lower despite all this population growth and economic growth. And that's because of all the efficiency. Replacing coal plants with natural gas combined cycle, those are more efficient. Replacing older cars with newer cars are more efficient. The LED light bulbs were really a big part of that story in the last 25 years. So that's a long-term trend that is relevant for the grid. A second long-term trend is increasing information intensity. We have more data and more information available for everything than we had before. And that helps us actually achieve some of the efficiency because we can fine-tune the optimization of the different devices or how they work together. And that increasing information intensity you heard alluded to in the earlier panels will show up again with artificial intelligence or bigger data sets or large language models or the different ways that information might show up and be deployed. It doesn't necessarily make us smarter, but it gives us the opportunity to be smarter. I don't know if you remember when the internet came to life, we thought, oh, well, now we'll all be smart. We'll have access to everything. And we're like, I'm not convinced we're actually smarter, but we do have more data. And we can use that data to achieve different things. And so the first technical trend is increasing energy efficiency. Second trend is increasing information intensity, and that increasing information intensity enables some of that energy efficiency. The third trend is increasing decentralization or decreasing centralization, which is kind of interesting because we've built up the energy system, whether it's refineries or power plants, with centralization as the goal for decades, perhaps a century, for reasons around economies of scale and universal access and other things. But now we have the rise of increasing decentralization, which could be rooftop solar or microgrids or gas generators behind the meter or large nuclear behind the meter, whatever it is, like decentralized solutions. We won't go back to 100% decentralized, but we have the rise of these other solutions, and it shows up not just for power, but also shows up with water, with like rainwater harvesting. It shows up with healthcare, with telemedicine. Instead of us all going to the hospital, we might go to a clinic, or we might just talk to the doctor through the television screen or the computer screen. It also shows up at manufacturing with desktop 3D printing instead of a large factory far away. It used to be a factory far away to make 1 million of the same thing, but now we have a desktop printer make 1 million custom versions of that. So we're going to decentralization for all sorts of sectors, and that will hit the power sector as well. And there's some good news from that and some bad news or some new operational challenges. But those technical trends are underway, and that changes the whole system. And in the end, that's the story of energy, is a story of change. It's always changing, and that's part of, I think we can convince ourselves that we have a stable sector, but actually it's always changing. There are periods where it changes faster, and I think we're in one of those. But then, maybe it changes quickly, then it's kind of stable for a decade or two, but even within that, it changes. So it's constantly changing with these technical trends, but also there's the demographic trends of population growth and economic growth and urbanization and everything else that's happening. So a lot of things changing in the energy system. One of the classes I teach at UT, I teach a variety of classes. I teach energy at the movies, by the way, for the liberal arts students. That's a lot of fun, so you should take that class if you can. I teach energy entrepreneurship, and I teach thermodynamics. And thermodynamics is one of the core engineering classes for energy systems, and thermo means heat or energy, and dynamics means change. So I'm teaching the class on changes in energy. So I just like to remind, it's a dynamic system. Well, those technical trends are wrapped up in this trilemma. Have you heard of the energy trilemma? So there's the trilemma. Okay, there's the which is like a dilemma, except it's got 3 parts, so it's not just 2 tensions. The energy trilemma has been like an intellectual framework to how to think of the tension in energy. And it's been around for a few decades, but I was thinking about it the other day and I realized actually the energy trilemma has changed. So right after 9/11, the energy trilemma in national security circles, when it comes to energy security or energy geopolitics, is the tension between the energy options that are good for national security, the energy options that are good for the economy, and the energy options that are good for the environment. It's a tension between the economy, the environment, and national security. That was the energy trilemma, say 2001 to 2015. And the idea there, and this is really around oil security and oil imports after 9/11. And the idea was you could have energy options that were good for 2 of the 3, but not all 3. And so to give an example, coal was considered really good for national security and really good for the economy because it was domestic and cheap, but bad for the environment. And wind and solar might be good for the environment, and maybe they're good for national security because they're domestically produced, or they're producing wind and solar domestically, but they're too expensive, so they're bad for the economy. That was the framework we had, this trilemma. But then around 2015, maybe to about now, we developed a new trilemma, which you might hear people talk about: race versus care versus acre. Acre is affordable, clean, reliable energy, and race is reliable, affordable, clean energy. And then, which one did I say? Care, clean, affordable, reliable energy, or race, I care. You can change your acronym around about, do we care about the cleanliness, the affordability, or the reliability of it? That's been the framework for energy for the last decade. But I actually think we're in this new trilemma, which is how do we expand energy access, in particular electricity access, while decarbonizing, while operating in a warmer world. We have to do all that at once, right? We have to expand the grid, which is amazing. You heard all the reasons this morning. The grid's going to grow, but we have to clean it up at the same time for a variety of reasons, and we also have to operate in a warmer world. And that warmer world gives us some different challenges along the way. So I think that's the new energy trilemma. So why do we need to expand the grid? Because the grid's desirable and electrons are desirable. If you look at energy and wealth around the world, energy access and affluence are correlated. The more money you have, the more energy you can buy and more energy you consume. But the more energy you have, the richer you can get. So having access to energy makes you rich, having access to money gives you access to energy, and these kind of feed forward for a while. But at some point, it kind of levels off where being richer doesn't necessarily mean you use more energy, or having more energy doesn't necessarily make you richer. But when you're energy poor, energy access really can help you make you rich and make you more comfortable and live a longer life and everything else. So there's a correlation, but not a perfect correlation, between energy and money. But there's a really good correlation between electricity and money. That if you want to get rich, actually it's electricity more than anything else. If you're energy poor, if you're in sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia, and you don't have energy, if you don't have modern energy, you're burning like wood or straw, cow dung, primarily for heating and cooking. But if you get access to modern forms of energy, think of like gasoline or propane or natural gas, but eventually electricity, you can start to use that energy for things beyond just heating or cooking. You can use it to do the civilized things, I hate that word, but so the things of a modern society, the things we do with electricity that we can't do with heat. Food preservation, air conditioning, water treatment, and all the things we're doing here with Zoom or whatever it is with the interconnectivity, telecom. Those are all electric. It's hard to preserve food with heat, although in the old days we would do smoking or salting or drying. It's hard to air condition with heat, although there are some absorption chillers, you can do it. It's hard to run a computer on heat. It's hard to do water treatment with heat. We tend to use electricity for those different functions. And so electricity in affluence or electricity in modernity are especially correlated. And so we expect electricity demand to grow, as it has. We can overcome some of that with efficiency, but we expect some growth. Maybe I'll make a comment about this growth because it's hard to know what the numbers are. Like the numbers are huge, right? We're 85 gigawatts, whatever we are at ERCOT. It's going to double or triple in 2 years or 20 years, and nobody knows. But the numbers are big. I am from Austin. I live in my childhood home, which is weird. How many of you live in your childhood home? Is it like any of you? Yeah, it's kind of weird, right? So I live in my childhood home. I was a faculty brat. My dad was a professor of chemistry, so I grew up on campus, and then I went to UT. Now I'm at UT. So I'm a guy without fresh ideas, apparently, and I made no progress because I'm right where I started. But just as a sign of how Austin has changed, my house was in the rural frontier. I had cedar choppers living in my backyard. Anybody know what a cedar chopper is? That's such a Central Texas thing. No one knows what cedar choppers are? Thank you for pretending to play along. Okay, so cedar choppers were Scotch-Irish Appalachian hillbillies, I forgive the word, who moved to Texas. And from the 30s to 60s, they would cut cedar trees for fence posts for ranches and made a lot of money. But they were the kids that would show up at school shoeless. Like it wasn't considered like a well-educated or thing, but they owned all that land out in Cedar Park or Leander or Westlake Hills, where I grew up in Rollingwood, or different places with this worthless land that you can't ranch on or grow food on, but you can cut down the trees, and that became this wealthy neighborhood, which is kind of funny. But we lived there because it was cheap. In the 70s, we moved in 1972, and now Elon's my neighbor. Elon's got 4 houses basically around the corner from me. It's kind of weird. So anyway, Elon's moved to the neighborhood, and I don't like to quote him too often, but he said something at the EEI annual meeting 2 years ago that I totally agree with. It was here in Austin, the Edison Electric Institute conference. And he was on stage, and he said, look, the demand for power is going to double or triple in the coming decades because you have no idea how many electric vehicles I'm going to sell. Now, his sales are off since then, but EV has gone up. And battery packs, everything else. And I totally agree. I think that gigawatts will double and terawatt hours will triple probably by 2050. I wouldn't be surprised that'll happen sooner. Demand is up because of his electric vehicles, induction cooktops, because of heat pumps, because of gigafactories, because of Bitcoin mines, because of AI centers, you name it. The new loads are electric. And even the traditional thermal loads, things for which we use heat, like refining or smelting metals, are electrifying as well. And so as we think about the refineries, I talked to Shell and BP and Chevron, you name them, they're all looking at electro-refining, using electricity to separate out the different distillates instead of just boiling oil to get crude into kerosene and jet fuel and gasoline, using electricity to separate. So if you're gonna have large electric loads, that's gonna change everything. Oil and gas is already electrifying the pumping, the compressors, the above ground separations, and also like LNG export terminals. So a lot of growth in electricity. So we have to expand, but we gotta clean up, and we have to operate in a warmer world. What does a warmer world mean? More drought, more heat wave, more windstorms, more tornadoes, more hurricanes, more floods. It also means more freezes. That's the weird part about a warming world, is in Texas, that means a milder winter on average, but deeper deep freezes more often. We'll have less energy consumption throughout the winter for heating, but every once in a while a deeper deep snap, because as we get more warming in the atmosphere, it warms the polar climate more than the mid-latitudes, and so the jet stream becomes wobbly. Wobbly is a scientific term. So that jet stream will dip down and bring a polar vortex with it. It'll be really hot in New York and Seattle and really cold in Texas. And as we electrify heat, our demand in Texas will exceed the demand in the summer for electric heating in the winter. So that's all we have to prepare for. So new kinds of challenges than what you might have been preparing for the last few decades. So that's where we are. We got 3 technology trends, 3 trilemmas. A couple things I'll say as we talk about it. I make a habit of making predictions in printed form so we know whether I'm right or wrong, and I've been at it long enough. We go back and can look at what I did, and I did this a year ago. I looked at the hundreds of op-eds I've written where I made predictions, and I graded myself. And the good news is I'm right more than I'm wrong. The bad news is like just barely. Like I'm like not passing score, but pretty good batting average, right? So, and the interesting thing about when I was wrong, I look back like, why was I wrong or when was I wrong, is if I bet against the pace of innovation, I probably was going to be wrong. And if I bet optimistically about the pace of policy, I was likely to be wrong. So policies tend to move slowly, technologies tend to move quickly, and that's a good lesson for us. And there are a lot of technical solutions. You heard them from the panel just before this, like with batteries and demand response and base power, all the nuclear innovation, all the things happening. So there's a lot of technical innovations that will happen. And they could be boring technologies like chilled water storage or really fancy stuff like smart algorithms to manage our batteries. But there's some innovations that are coming. And I expect that will actually lower the cost of electricity. Despite all the growth, despite the doubling of the gigawatts and tripling of the terawatt hours, I expect by a few years from now, cost of power will be lower, because the biggest challenge we have with the grid today, I would say, as a systems thinker, is that we have a multi-trillion-dollar sector that we use on average less than 50% of the time. That is nuts. If you take any other capital-intensive industry, refineries, airlines, pipelines, they aim for 85% or higher utilization. We have under 50% utilization, and that's because we're better at it today than a few years ago. It used to be 44% utilization, now we're like 50%. And as we have these smarter technologies and the flexible loads, was it Lee that talked about, like, we need to have some of the other non-firm load class, and other people talking about this. So as we have more kinds of flexible loads, we can get higher utilization of the existing multi-trillion-dollar fleet, and then we can lower cost of service for everybody. So I think electricity costs are going to go down because we're going to have more demand, which will force us to be smarter. We can also do some market changes. So technology is a big part of this, but I think we need to think about prices like on rotational inertia. It came up in the last panel a lot. We need a price on inertia probably. We probably need to think about kilowatts versus kilowatt hours at the residential level. We pay for kilowatt hours instead of kilowatts. Probably we should pay for kilowatts. And we probably need to think about fixed versus variable pricing. We have used variable price bills for our homes forever to pay for a mostly fixed cost system. I think we've gone about as far as we can with that. And right now we're kind of like historically 40% T&D, 60% generation in the power sector. It's maybe 50-50 today. We're probably going to be 80-20, 80% fixed, 20% generation in the future as fuel costs go down as we do more geothermal, nuclear, wind, and solar, and less coal and less gas. So we're going to a high fixed cost environment. Our rates don't reflect that. So we need some market mechanisms to deal with that, in addition to the technical innovations. So that's kind of like my big picture view. Everything's changing. There's a lot of fun. There's a lot of good stuff going on. We have technological solutions and market solutions. And then we also have these culture shifts that happen around our view and mood around energy. And if I have 1 minute, do I still have 1 minute to make a comment before we go to Q&A? I saw you held a 5-minute thing. So Derek's a good friend and a colleague at UT, a nuclear engineering professor, and he was talking about nuclear earlier. One thing I think about nuclear is a fascinating example. It's the only form of energy in my lifetime I've seen go from a negative public impression to a positive public impression in the span of about 6 months. And this is a sign that cultural attitudes can shift quite quickly. I mean, we change our mood about energy. We loved coal in the 70s because it solved some oil crisis problems. Like if you look in the 70s, 17% of our power came from oil. And then we had 2 oil crises. We're like, okay, forget it. That's too much. Let's go to coal. So we loved coal in the 70s, and we even outlawed gas. It was illegal to build a gas power plant, starting in 1978 for about 9 years. So we didn't like gas, didn't like oil, but liked coal, but now we don't like coal. But then for a while, we didn't like nuclear, now we like nuclear. So our moods can shift. Nuclear is special, though, because it went from negative to positive so quickly. And it might be because of its excellent performance, like you mentioned. It might be because it solves a lot of our problems. But I suspect there's more to the story, which is there are 3 things that happened in parallel last fall, which were very non-technical. One is there's a Brazilian supermodel who's like a nuclear enthusiast, and her name, she goes by the handle Isodope, like I am so dope, or Isotope, but she goes around promoting nuclear. And then you have Grace Stenke, the Miss America, the beauty pageant winner, who's a nuclear engineer, works for Constellation on the nuclear floor. And then you had the Texas A&M nuclear engineering student who showed up on ESPN Game Day. Do you guys watch ESPN Game Day? He had the I love nuclear sign. That football game did not go well for A&M. That was a Notre Dame game, I think. But he just held up a handwritten sign that said, I love nuclear, and it went viral. So students started doing that. So between the nuclear engineers at A&M and the beauty pageant winners and the fashion models, some things changed with nuclear. And that's, for me, I'm like, that's fascinating. We can change our mood about power, forms of fuel, and technology very quickly for reasons that were not obvious. And so that's just one more change to add on top of everything else. Anyway, that's probably an inappropriate anecdote to end on, but I'll stop there, and we have a few minutes for questions so we can talk about whatever I didn't talk about that is on your mind. But thank you very much for having me. I know I'm a fast talker. I guess we'll stop there. Any questions? Looks like there's one already on the screen. Is a certain amount of new generation of any, say, fuel or technology more important, or should there be a bigger focus on energy efficiency? I think efficiency is always a good place to start because it buys you time and it lets you get more out of the system, and it tends to be pretty cheap. So to do efficiency, and maybe if I could be so bold to mix and match efficiency with demand response, which I know those are different things, but if you look at efficiency or demand response, they often cost like $250 per kilowatt of capacity, whereas new capacity might be $1,000 to $8,000 of capacity. So efficiency is cheaper. I really like that. The other thing about efficiency is you can deploy it one house at a time, or one device at a time, or one appliance at a time, so you can get rolling like tomorrow. Whereas the large capacity, you want to build a wind farm 2 years, solar farm 2 years, other forms of power 4 years or more. And so we can start conservation tomorrow at the device level, device, appliance, house by house, and that buys us time and it's a lot cheaper. It's hard to get all the way there with efficiency, though. It's hard to solve the whole problem with efficiency, but it sure does make it easier. And if you look at us compared to France, so you heard I was Chief Science Technology Officer at ENGIE for a while, so I was based in Paris, France. They use about half as much electricity per person in France. Now, okay, there's a variety of cultural things around fear of air conditioners there, but they have a lot more efficiency. And so we have more to do in the built environment, especially with efficiency. So I think we should start with efficiency. That won't be enough. So we'll have to add in some of the other solutions as well. That's a great question. Are there policies at the national state level that should be implemented to help address your new trilemma? So policies touch politics, and politics touches ideology. So yeah, I've got some policy views, but that reflects my personal ideological view. I think there are several things we need. I believe what the United States is good at, and I hope we remain good at this, and frankly I'm worried, is we have been good for a century or more at innovation, just getting things invented and deployed. And we're very good at that. We fund a national innovation ecosystem, especially since World War II with universities and national labs. The government funds for innovation that industry will not fund. Industry will do applied research, it'll do product development, but it doesn't do fundamental research, with a few exceptions along the way. And so we're really good at national innovation. I would love to keep that going. I think we're good at that. I'm worried we're gonna end that because the budget cuts suggest we shouldn't do that anymore. I think we're really good at protecting intellectual property federally. We're better at that than any other country. So if we fund the innovation ecosystem and then protect the intellectual property that comes out of it, that will be very good for the system. And that will help drive down the cost of everything, including the clean stuff. And so I think as long as we focus on priming the pump of innovation, protecting it so people can make their gains, they invent something, they get financially rewarded for it, we'll probably get to the right answer. And then I also think it's appropriate role of government to put a price on pollution. I would say you shouldn't get to pollute for free. And that means if you have emissions, put a price on emissions, make it a market force, just like they did for acid rain. We put price on pollution for acid rain. We've done it before. There are prices on greenhouse gas pollution in certain regions of the United States or other countries. So put a price on pollution so you don't get to pollute for free. If you hate wind, you can hit wind with the land pollution or the site pollution. We do that in Austin, by the way. If you block the view, you pay a fine. It's a couple $1 million or something, and you might decide it's worth it. So if you're a wind farm, you block the view, you can pay a fine. If you're a coal plant and you emit CO2, you should pay a fine. I feel like put a price on the bad stuff and then invest in the innovation for the good stuff, we'll get to the right answer. So I would say, let's make sure we keep protecting intellectual property. Let's keep priming the pump of innovation. Let's put a price on pollution, and then we can remove all the subsidies and then just let the markets work, and that'd be a pretty efficient way to get there. So rather than arguing about which subsidies to keep or kill, I say kill all of them, put a price on pollution, we'll probably get to the right answer. What role do higher institutions like UT? Of course, we got many higher institutions in Texas with Texas A&M and Rice and Texas Tech and Houston, SMU, TCU. So we're really rich in top flight research capabilities in the state of Texas. But what do those institutions have to play in helping address our energy challenges? There are a couple things. We can have the luxury of time to think about things without worrying about reporting next quarter's finances. And I would say I've been in academia, steeped in academia. I worked at a big company. I mean, Engie's a 100,000 person company with 120 gigawatts of power capacity. And I had a 400 person research portfolio, so I had labs around the world reporting to me, and we launched companies, all this kind of. So I've been in the corporate world, I've been in the venture world, I've been in academia. And when you're in the business world at a company like Engie, you can build anything, anywhere in the world. It's phenomenal what those big companies can do. But it's hard at a big company to think beyond next quarter. You could have a 2030 goal and 2040 goal, but your shareholders get on your case pretty often if you're not making a lot of money. So it forces an operational mindset, which is great. That's why we have reliability. It forces a profitability mindset, which is great. That's why we can make money from the system. But it's hard to get long-term thinking in that place. You go to academia, we're not going to make any money. We don't lose or win from our stupid ideas or good ideas for the most part. So we have the luxury to think from first principles. Now, it also means we can think of stupid stuff that will never work in reality, but it also means we're not stuck by whatever we did last year. So in the operational world, you do whatever you did last year, but a little bit better this year. And that's just the nature of incremental improvement. You get better. But we can start from scratch so we get some breakthroughs. In fact, most breakthroughs came from fundamental research like that, whether it's materials or other things. And so university has a role in that fundamental research. Let's take some new ideas. The other thing we can do is train up the people. And there's a tension in universities. Do we teach or train? What do we do? Should we train or teach? Training is teach someone a skill. Teaching is teaching someone how to learn. And these are different. And skills are really useful and in short supply, so we should train more people. But as you've seen, I guess, for many of you already, some skills get out of fashion 20 or 30 years later, and now we have mass layoffs of the coders that we told to go learn how to code 20 or 30 years ago. And so skills might be short-lived, but learning might be forever, so we're in this constant tension, and probably we should do some combination of both. So Derek Haas mentioned workforce shortages in nuclear, but it's not just nuclear, right? There's 100,000 missing electricians, 100,000 missing plumbers, there's 1,000 missing grid modelers. Grid modeling, which is very specialized. We need like 1,000 more grid modelers. So I think we need to do research at UT. We have to train up. My classes are all full. I do exec ed. I did an exec ed class a couple weeks ago, 50 people in that class. I'm like, okay, I need to probably do this like every 2 months or something like that. So we need to train, teach, and do research, and that will be helpful. And maybe there'll be a shift in who does the research. It looks like there's less federal support for research universities. We'll see how it goes. Maybe industry will step up on that. But in my experience, in my view of the long arc, is companies don't do fundamental research unless they have a monopoly. Like Bell Labs did fundamental research. They developed the transistor and invented the microelectronics industry. They had a monopoly. They were required by law to invest like 10% of their profits into the public good, which they did with research. Xerox had a monopoly on document solutions. They had Xerox PARC. PARC is Palo Alto Research Center. They invented the computer mouse and the graphical user interface. Eastman Kodak had a monopoly of photography, developed the digital camera. So there are some, and I say maybe Amazon has a monopoly on retail, and Google had for a while, monopoly on search. So the monopolies will do research, but the rest don't. It's hard, like it's just hard to spend money on research if your competitors don't have to. So I think that's where the universities and labs step up. That's a great question. By the way, are there questions in the room too? I'll just keep reading from the screen, but if you have, maybe raise your hand if you have a question here as well. What are my thoughts on thorium? I would say I have no thoughts. I just go to Derek and ask him. But thorium, you got some research on thorium right now, right? Didn't you just put out a paper on this?
Yes. So,
I'll repeat it. If you say it, I'll repeat it to the audience.
thorium will be great eventually. There's no reason to do it over uranium.
Okay, thorium will be great eventually. No reason to do over uranium now. That's a great, succinct explanation. I mean, it has some benefits in terms of proliferation resistance and things like that. It's harder to make it to a weapon, maybe. So.
It's dramatically oversold on the internet.
It's dramatically oversold on the internet. Okay, the internet has oversold something. Okay, yeah, it's amazing. Amazing, okay, well, good to know. I used to go to the internet for my nuclear input. Now I'll go to you, okay. That's a great question. Any questions in the room? I'll go here. Okay, what load contributes most to the grid total load swing? What could be done to flatten the load peaks and values? Like I said, I'll talk about Texas. 50% of peak load in the winter, 50% of the peak load in the summer is residential heating or cooling. So it's essentially flat for the industrial load. Commercial load's mostly flat with some swings by time of year, if it's a shopping year or heating or cooling time, but residential is where the big swing is. And that's the problem. And I would say because we designed for the swing, not the base load, but it's much easier to serve the flat load than it is to serve the swings. And so the swings drive the cost for everybody. But we don't charge people based on the swings, and that's where I come back to, we should probably charge for kilowatts, the swing, as well as the kilowatt hours, which is the area under the curve. And so because we don't charge for that, we don't manage it. As we don't manage it, it's kind of out of control. And as we have these colder winters and more electric heat, we're going to have a winter peaking grid instead of a summer peaking grid. And that is just crazy because the summer peak rises for 2 months and goes back down for 2 months. The winter peak is like mild, 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 huge spike, back down, mild, mild, mild. So you have to have a lot of capacity available for 3 days of that cold snap. And so we need to manage that better. And I think that Americans don't necessarily value the environment. We don't necessarily value our neighbor, but we do value money. And so a way to get there is to put a price on it. Hey, you want to have a big swing? No problem. You just have to pay for it. In fact, Socialist France uses the market system much more than we do. Socialist France says, oh, you want a 200 amp panel? Well, you're going to have to pay more than that for that than the 100 amp panel. Like they basically have a demand charge based on the panel size. And they say it's up to you to figure out on your side of the panel how to manage it. And you'll learn not to have your hair dryer and your tea kettle and your iron on all at once because it pops the circuit. So they're doing manual demand response. Like, oh, I better just run 2 at a time. Which seems kind of clunky and clumsy, but it works. And so they can manage their electric heating grid. So there are ways to get there. I would say getting Texans to go around turning things on and off might not be the solution. We can get there more smartly, more intelligently with devices that can read, oh, it's heating peak demand. Maybe there are things we can turn off for a little bit, like a water heater or a pool pump, or we can cycle the HVAC or something like that. So I think we can get there. But it's really the residential sector that drives the problems. It's also the residential sector that's not asked to pay for the problems it drives. And this is really a way to be unpopular. Let me tell you how to be unpopular. So I was a regulator for Austin Energy for 5 years, 2008 to 2013. So I had rate setting responsibilities, like we had to do a rate change. And in 2013, we did the first rate change in 18 years. Rates had to go up. It had been 18 years. And I'm the guy that made everybody mad because I'm like, let's go high fixed charge and lower variable charge. Let's have time of day charges. Let's have kilowatt charge. Like nobody liked anything I said. And it was like universal, like churches hated it because they have no demand until Sunday morning at 10 a.m. Then so they got high demand but low kilowatt hours. Retirees, like people are like, why do you hate retired grandmas? And why do you hate churches? And why do you hate everything? I'm like, I just want grid reliability. But so this is really hard to get there with rate design, but I think we push it off as long as we can. We probably have to update our rates to solve this problem. And I think this is my cue, perhaps.
Unfortunately, I think we could do this all day, but we do have another panel coming up, so thank you very much, Dr. Weber.
Thank you very much for having me. Thank you very much.
So we'll take a quick break and be back at 1:20 for our third panel of the day.